Welcome to Detailed, an original podcast by RCAT. This is a show where we uncover lessons learned to help you navigate your next project. I'm Cherise Lakeside, Senior Specification Writer at RDH Building Science, and your host. My guests today are Jon Gentry, AIA, and Aimée O'Carroll, ARB, both co-founders of GO'C, that's G-O''C, in Seattle, Washington. Jon previously worked as a project architect for 9 years in Seattle, with a number of award-winning and internationally recognized practices. Growing up in rural North Carolina instilled a strong appreciation for the landscape and a passion for built structures. Jon believes that architecture born of a passionate process and inextricably tied to the act of making can inspire and elevate the everyday. Having designed custom lighting fixtures and furniture that have been exhibited and sold internationally, his work delves into architecture at every scale. Aimée, born and educated in the United Kingdom at the University of Cambridge and the Architectural Association, moved to Seattle to pursue architectural practice with Jon Gentry after a successful transatlantic partnership in several design competitions. A 1-year stint at Rural Studio, designing and building a house for $20,000 in rural Alabama, created a passion for hands-on experiences and problem solving. Aimée is passionate about design as a collaborative process and enjoys finding opportunities in this process that blur the conventional perceptions of what we understand as architecture. Founded in 2012, GO'C has been widely published and recently awarded the AIA Emerging Firm of the Year in the Northwest and Pacific region. The project we will be talking about today is the Mini Mart City Park in the Georgetown neighborhood of Seattle, Washington. Don't let the name fool you. This project is not what you think. Nestled in Seattle's Georgetown neighborhood, Mini Mart City Park emerges as a symbol of renewal and community unity. Community unity. Once an abandoned gas station, the project came to life through the collaborative efforts of GO'C and SuttonBeresCuller, or SBC. Their aim was clear: through the integration of a remediation system, to transform a neglected space into a vibrant cultural center. Now, let's get into the details. Welcome back to Detailed. My guests today are Jon Gentry, AIA, and Aimée O'Carroll, ARB, both co-founders of GO'C in Seattle, Washington. And that's GO'C is G-O''C, in case you're looking for it. The project we are chatting about today is the Mini Mart City Park in the Georgetown neighborhood in Seattle, where I will be next week. Don't let the name of this project fool you. This project is not what you think. It certainly turned out not to be what I thought when I first got the information about the project. Jon and Aimée, welcome to Detailed. Thank you for joining me on the show today. How are you?
We're good. Thanks for inviting us on the show. We're excited to talk about the project.
Wow.
I'm excited to talk about this project. Really unique. Is your weather as bad up there as it is down here? I'm in Portland, Oregon.
Yeah.
It's wet here today. Yeah.
Yeah. Good day for this then. So we usually start with just some kind of fun icebreaker question. So the question for you today is, what's the best piece of professional advice that anyone has ever given you, and how did that make a difference for you?
I had a professor in undergraduate school, and I think it was like during graduation day, he just left us with be bold, going out into the world. And I think with our projects from various scales that we do, any kind of small project that we take on, it's just coming up with a moment in those projects to really be clear and concise about an idea and to be bold with those as we kind of develop those designs. And we try to take that through all of our work.
And I think for me, actually kind of similarly to Jon, I studied at Rural Studio for a year, and they have a couple of mantras. One of them is proceed and be bold, which is similar to what Jon had too. But the other one is that architecture should be shelter for the soul. And whether that's a residential project or an arts project or a commercial project, I think that's something that we kind of bring to our thought process for the work that architecture should really be shelter for the soul, and you should feel that when you're in there.
I love that. I'm gonna write that down so I don't forget immediately after this interview. So let's talk about the project. This is really, really unique. When I saw the name of the project, I had an expectation of what I thought I was going to see, which was some kind of convenience store, to be perfectly honest. And that is not clearly what this is. So let's start with a little history about this building and site. What did you have to work with?
Well, the site is in Georgetown, as you mentioned, and historically that's always been a fairly industrial area of Seattle from kind of the 1930s, with the lumber industry through to the arrival of Boeing. It's used during World War II, and it's meant that it's always been fairly contaminated and kind of saw a decline in the residential neighborhoods there and a lot of vacant buildings. And the project itself kind of, is a means to revitalize a space in that area. And its siting is right between the kind of residential area and right on the border of Boeing Field. So it's sort of this physical boundary between industrial, residential, and also, is very much in the middle of this quite highly contaminated brownfield area. So quite a challenging starting point for us to work with, and for the clients and owners when they kind of came across this site. The property itself kind of had many lives, from being a gas station in its original built form through to a laundromat, an office space. It had storage for Boeing for jet fuel underground. So it's had a varied life, but none of it being kind of conducive to a sort of healthy living environment for a space there. So that was kind of what we were working with, and a real challenge versus other projects that we'd started on in the past.
I can only imagine. What were the owners' goals and mission for this project? How were they planning for it to be used? How is it being used?
They had pretty clear goals. They had been working on the project for years before we even came on board, which we can talk about a little bit more in the conversation. But they kind of had these like title bullet points, like cleaning the earth with art and architecture was one, to educate, to be a place to teach people about the remediation that was necessary for the site, and how we were kind of approaching that with the project. That was like an important initial goal. And then just the idea of these artists and us as the architects coming together, like art and architecture on this corner lot in Georgetown, to be like a permanent cultural center, a structure for people to come together and really strengthen community ties. And like, it's just been amazing to see it unfold in that way, through the use of the community.
I know that you originally had hoped to use that gas station that was already there, but ultimately decided against it. Why was that decision made?
What was left on the site was sort of the remnants of that original gas station building, which had been sort of heavily modified over the years in the different uses. But when we came to it, it'd been derelict for a very long time, and people had broken in. The site was overgrown with brambles and blackberries, and it was just this very inhospitable corner of this residential block. And we did, have that initial hope that something could be salvaged. But as we started the design process, it really became evident pretty quickly that not only was the structure in really, really bad shape, but that 450 square foot wasn't going to be enough to really do all the things that needed to happen on the project and house all the program that the clients wanted. So we decided to demolish the building, but kind of keep the spirit of that kind of iconic idea of a gas station in the language of that architecture. And we'll talk a little bit more how that went through to the design process.
Broadly, tell me what your original design vision was for the project. What were you hoping to achieve?
For the site, just kind of high level, it's on a corner lot facing east and south, which was kind of an advantage, with so much of this kind of east-west site facing south. Like we we knew we wanted, I mean, Aimée mentioned the existing building wasn't big enough, but it was also centered right in the middle of the site. And so the new building, we really felt strongly that it should be like pushed as far north as we could, which we did. And we kind of set up a 1/3 building, 2/3 green space, like giving back as much kind of open green space around the building that we could. And most of that is kind of on that south part of the site. That was like a big driver early on, just for like site planning. It turned out that we were able to use some of that north part of the lot, like on the north side of the building, for bioretention planters and a planted wall and a mural wall, all stuff that kind of came in later. But really the big site planning move was to have the building kind of pushed to the north.
In the design vision for the building itself?
For the building itself, I mean, if you look at images of, that we took, that was 2022, the final images.
Yep.
It has this like linear quality to the building. So, again, situated to the north, but then kind of stacking the program from east to west, like with this long sheltering roof that like ties everything together. This is like a design move that we love to embrace when we can on projects. Like, and it kind of goes back to that first question about what's the bold move here, and that roof, like tying these spaces together from the front court on the east side of the site, the front court kind of being this kind of harkening back to the old gas station where you'd pull up underneath to fill up, into the gallery space, which is kind of the central enclosed space on the site. The next sort of what we called like outdoor room was the courtyard between the gallery space up front and the utility kind of mechanical box in the back. So we really kind of set up this sort of chain of spaces, interior and exterior, along that east-west axis, as the kind of like organizing design move for the building.
Before we get into building specifics, let's talk, because I think this is really important. Let's talk about the brownfield site in a little more detail. Because I've worked on some projects like this. What challenges did you face with a site? I didn't realize beyond the gas station that some of these other places like Boeing with jet fuel had been there. What challenges did you face with that contaminated site, and how did you deal with it?
Yeah, like as you said, we weren't only dealing with the sort of the general brownfield nature of Georgetown and sort of this neighborhood in particular, but the particular uses that came from it being a gas station and the petroleum storage and even the laundromat, I think, probably added to that too. And this was always a real priority for the clients, that they create a healthy space for people to be in, and an educational space. And they really saw it as a model to how brownfield sites like this could be used. And we learned a huge amount during the process. And they kind of started working pretty early on, even long before that we were involved in the project, with the Environmental Protection Agency as to how you could approach a site like this. And I think when they were talking about it to us, they sort of told us about these different approaches that you could take, where you either kind of isolate your property and do what you can to get rid of all that contaminated soil and kind of fill it back in and create almost like a physical boundary. I think they talked about like this lead bathtub approach for the site, and you're just sort of only dealing with that area. And they didn't really want to do that. There was a high cost to that, and they just didn't really see it as a sustainable approach to the problem. So working with different consultants, an environmental agency, they came up with the use of an air sparging system. So below the whole property, there's a series of sort of points where oxygen is introduced into the soil, and that oxygen activates the bacteria in the soil that eats away at the petroleum contaminants that are in the earth. So it's an ongoing process of remediation that even once that little area is cleared and clean, there's always going to be toxins driven into the property from the neighboring areas. So having a system which continually cleans forever, in theory, as long as the structure's around, it was this like amazing sustainable approach to addressing the brownfield contaminated problem. And it's this great opportunity to educate the community about the area and the means and methods to which you can approach something like this. And they have, groups of kids come through and kind of all sorts of other groups that they educate along the way to help them really understand what you can do with a project like this.
Well, I can tell you, I just learned something big because I've never heard of a system like that before. And so I will be Googling after this interview. That's awesome. So I love how when I was reading your project description, you talked about, in quotes, healing an urban problem.
Definitely.
Tell me about that and why this project sets an example that is so important.
I mean, for us, for GO'C, I don't think we've ever been a part of a project that's been such a transformation from basically a complete blight on the urban residential landscape to the way it's being used now. Like if you walked by this site in 2008, it would be difficult to imagine how such a derelict structure and kind of overgrown site, like Aimée mentioned, could become a hub for the community and also offer back public green space and be an ongoing educational tool for how the project can repair damaged land. So, I mean, we really embraced that in the process. I mean, we couldn't believe our luck. Just to talk about SuttonBeresCuller a little bit, if we have time here, like 2000, probably 3 or 4. I'm in Seattle and I see an article in the local City Arts magazine, I think. SuttonBeresCuller had built a little island out on Lake Washington that they were like stranded on, for I think for a whole week. They kind of, so if these guys are doing like really interesting work, and like I kind of heard about them, almost 20 years ago. And so for them to come to us with a project that they were really passionate about, and like, I mean, originally kind of presented it to us like the park and the building would eventually, and may still be the case, like be gifted back to the city in a way. So yeah, that was just like amazing for us to kind of learn about. They came to us because they saw our floating sauna structure in, I think, the same magazine, in City Arts magazine. That's how they heard about us. So they kind of saw us as taking risk in the work that we were doing. We saw them doing the same and like wanting to do something different for the community. So we felt very fortunate to be asked to be a part of this project.
I'm sure a lot of people are going to be getting some great ideas from this episode, because I was enthralled reading about this project. I went further and trolled on the internet for more information. I was just so interested in what you did here. Yeah,
and you like SuttonBeresCuller, SBC, had the same kind of vision when they approached the project. They kind of researched how many of these types of sites were in the Puget Sound region, and like, could this be kind of an inspiration for other people to take on this kind of project? I don't think they're going to be taking on one quite like this again anytime soon. But for SBC, this was a project that started for them in 2005. I mentioned we photographed it in 2022 for a little timeline, and we were involved from 2014 to 2022. It was an ongoing process, and took amazing dedication from their team.
Well, that's impressive. Were there any issues getting this project permitted due to these conditions?
The permitting process was quite lengthy, and we were kind of lucky. Like Jon said, SBC were just so dedicated to this cause, and particularly Jon Sutton, one of the artists and artist trio, kind of took this on as his sort of life work almost, to do everything he could to make this happen. So there was a lot that happened behind the scenes before we were even involved. So they worked with the environmental agencies and with the city for quite a few years. Well, I guess from 2008, when they actually bought the property, till when we started in 2014. So they had done a lot of the legwork and had some great support from people in the city, and a lot of grants kind of already lined up as well for culture and neighborhood just had sort of really laid the groundwork for us. So when we came along, we weren't dealing with too much to do with sort of environmental restrictions, and it was more, I guess, typical kind of architectural permitting problems that we had, a change of use for this, the zoning of this site. It's technically classified as an institution, and the city has these rules that you can't have two institutions within, I think, 400 feet. It was a church around the corner, so we had to do a master use permit.
I had kind of blocked that
yeah.
in my memory.
So there was a lengthy master use permit process just to be allowed to have this type of building on this piece of land, and then sort of the more typical building permit challenges. So it took a number of years, as did everything with this project, but it worked out. And being that it was an entirely grant funded project, the timeline, sometimes you can't really look at it in the same way as a typical project, and that lengthy permitting time kind of gave them more time to gather the funds so that we would be in a better spot once we did get everything approved to actually start building this. So we learned a lot through the process, and just kind of seeing the support from the city for a project like this really kind of gave us hope that it would all come through in the end, and it did. So it was great.
You guys aren't my first interview with architects in Seattle. And I have to say, and I'm in Portland, Pacific Northwest, we are a little bit crazier in our area about what kind of projects we want to put out. I like to believe that we're a little bit more passionate and a little bit more environmentally conscious than a lot of places. But that is the second time where I've heard that Seattle, the city of Seattle, was extra helpful.
Yeah,
even if there were challenges to get something done that would be
right.
I mean, I think
the best thing for the city.
There were grants from the Office of Arts and Culture. Directly, project.
Yeah, and I think they, SBC identified some key people who really sort of helped fight for the cause, and that were involved in the city, and having that kind of inside enthusiasm.
It's probably a separate podcast, but you could interview Jon Sutton about all the grant writing and funding and support from the arts community. There are patrons from Suyama Space, George Suyama's art space, that gave money when that space was kind of retired, gave money directly to this building to kind of continue that legacy forward. I mean, amazing kind of how it all came together, and not without a ton of work, especially from Jon Sutton.
Passion seems to speak loudly when something's really important.
Yep.
Okay, so let's talk about the building. I like to work my way from the outside in. So let's start with the outside of the building. In more detail, being more specific, describe the site, the building exterior layout, and the amenity spaces on the outside of the building.
Yeah, I can start. Maybe Aimée can chime in, because I've mentioned some of this in the previous question. But it's located in Georgetown Neighborhood on a corner lot. It's kind of facing east towards Boeing Field, which is kind of interesting from a site location standpoint.
Yeah.
The plane, I mean, it's a smaller airport than SeaTac, obviously, but the planes coming in are super low. Like, it's kind of that really dramatic sort of landing spot as they fly over the building. So it's like you're in this sort of industrial zone of the city, but it's also surrounded by a little neighborhood area.
Yep.
I guess west of that arterial street where kind of public transit runs right alongside the building on the east side of the building. Like I mentioned before, the building's sort of pushed to the north part of the site. We have this forecourt where the roof cantilevers out to the east pretty dramatically, covering that forecourt area. We kind of imagine that to be not only like the big kind of announcing entrance to the building, but maybe a spot where exterior dinners might happen. There's lighting in the rafter kind of space up above, and just like a really inviting sort of entry that sort of announces itself to the east. And then those series of rooms. So the next space is like the main gallery and community center space. All of the art kind of events happen in that main space. There's a linear skylight that's 15 foot long that runs the center of that spine of that space. It drops natural light down into the gallery. The next space over, as we're moving west across the site, we call it like an outdoor room, is the little courtyard. It's enclosed on the sides by the front gallery space and the utility box in the back, and then kind of a mural wall on the north side, and then opens itself up to the park to the south. And then the final little building volume is the utility box mechanical space. It's got two ADA bathrooms, and then of course it's got the air sparging system like within the mechanical space. So in that space, you're able to, Jon Sutton does a lot of the tours, and Ben Bears, I know, has recently, of folks that visit the site, but they definitely take people in there and kind of show off that system, that it's a sustainable approach to dealing with a site like this.
And the park itself is just basically green space. Like people can hang out there.
Yeah. We brought in a lot of new plants, of native plants and ground cover along the south and the west. We kind of bermed up on the west side, which is kind of nice, a little elevation to the ground plane, as we go to the east side of the site, west side of the site. And then they had, SBC had these artists come in. I think SBC was involved too in the patterning for these fences that wrap around the site that support growth of native plants, kind of further surrounding the park and kind of intertwining the park and the building.
And a lot of the park and landscaping was sort of volunteer-led. I think they worked with Dirt Corps here in Seattle to do a lot of the planting and erecting of those fences, and it's sort of one of the many components where volunteers were involved in actual kind of construction of the project.
Mm-hmm.
I am kind of amazed at, for this, in comparison, fairly small scale building, how many people were so dedicated to making sure it happened from all over the place. I think that's amazing. What were some of your material choices on the exterior of this building?
We, kind of early on in the design process and how we presented things in schematic design to SuttonBeresCuller, we were wanting to kind of take cues from the original language of the gas station and that kind of iconic image everyone has in their head of the gas station forecourt, kind of like Jon mentioned, and then really use it as a design tool to create these activated outdoor spaces. It was a budget-driven project too, so we weren't looking to use any sort of crazy materials that were going to be hard to maintain over the years. That we wanted something that could potentially be installed by volunteers if needed, easy to maintain. So we kind of returned to the idea of the, traditional cedar painted siding and this sort of quite iconic language, bold language of the design. Sign painting on the exterior. You're going to see in the image behind us. So the actual Mini Mart City Park logo, which you see a lot of that in Georgetown in the warehouse and kind of auto shop architecture and remnants of these old painted signs. So we really kind of drew inspiration from the history of the site and sort of used that to inspire us as to what this building could look like from the exterior and how it could be used spatially as well. The light blue on the underside of the forecourt kind of harks back to the traditional southern porches, both Jon's background in North Carolina, my time in Alabama. The idea of these blue ceilings, which were thought to ward off ghosts and spirits. We kind of presented that idea and the clients liked that too, being that we sort of did have this sort of semi-traditional language in some way to the materiality of the project. So we kind of had these like fun little elements that you might not notice, but have, some history to them.
Okay, so let's go inside the building. First, describe in more detail the different spaces inside. You've touched on it a little bit, but if I were to close my eyes and you get me to visualize what I'm walking through when I walk through this building.
Yeah, so starting under those kind of exposed rafters and ceiling that's painted that kind of sky blue, you're you're on axis with this kind of east-west building. The entry door is right on axis with this 15-foot skylight. So you open the door, that skylight's running right down the spine of the building, dropping natural light through the rafters. The ceiling is all naturally kind of clear finished fir rafters and plywood. And over to the left, you would see this kinetic element, this big, I think it's 6'6" by 8 foot tall window, just kind of on the corner, the southeast corner of the space. And that was an effort for us. Like, we wanted to have lots of art walls surrounding the gallery for easily displaying work, but we really wanted a strong connection to that park element to the south. And Aimée and I kind of always called it the cafe corner, like where you could open this window up, kind of like the mechanic shop, like rolling the door back, opening up to the outside. And we kind of imagined it. I'm not sure they've used it this way or not. Maybe they have, like this little ticketing spot or coffee beverage, beverages served to the park, and like really like a little gathering corner. As you move through the space, there's art walls either side. In the kind of northwest corner of that gallery room, there's a little kitchenette with open shelves and storage, and little appliances there for the kitchen. And then through the courtyard space, which has been amazing to see how they use this for, like, they've had DJs on the little bridge up above. They've had dance performances. They've had sculptures like in the courtyard space. We kind of saw this as this sort of multi-use exterior space, but also if they ever wanted to bring large pieces of sculpture like through and into the building, the back sliders facing west, like really stack open so that you can do that. And then the final kind of component, the volume to the west, is we call it the utility box. It's the mechanical rooms, the bathrooms, and kind of where that air sparging system is on display. And then a little mechanical roof access stair.
Yeah.
So I want to touch on that huge window a little bit more, because that really, everybody has a different emotional response to what they see.
Yeah.
And I saw this humongous window with this big wheel that you turn to open it. Mm-hmm. And I just thought that was the coolest thing. What made you choose that particular type of window?
So we kind of, like I mentioned, we wanted this big kind of opening and connection to that South Park side. And it just so happened, like, if you walk through Georgetown, there's little kinetic sculptures kind of on the sidewalk down there next to some of the restaurants. And there's an artist named Chris McMullen, and this was like a previous relationship that SuttonBeresCuller had with Chris McMullen. They knew of his work. They wanted to incorporate other artists into the build of the project. And so then we sort of just presented this idea, hey, there's a big window that like opens to the park here. We have some experience doing kinetic pieces. And then it was just natural. Like they were like, well, we'll just have Chris make this piece. So like we gave him kind of overall dimensions, where we thought the pivot should be. And then Chris really like developed the whole like kinetic artistry of that piece. And it's kind of on display really, really thoughtfully kind of in the gallery. So it's just one of those moments that, back to the original vision from the owners, like bringing art and architecture together in this kind of cultural space. And that was a moment where we could do that.
Yeah.
Well, you did it very successfully. And I love that you made the piece of architecture a piece of art within the building. I mean, it was just fantastic. It caught my eye immediately.
Thank you.
Describe in detail some of the materials and finishes you used in the interior spaces.
So kind of similarly to the exterior, the interior needed to be pretty hardworking as well. It was going to have all these different uses, whether it was a gallery, having things, hung on the walls over and over again, or a community space, or a gathering space. It was just going to, be used in many different ways, and needed to be able to respond to that and be easy for the owners to upkeep over the years. So the palette is pretty simple. There's simple white walls. There's plywood backing behind them so they can hang work over and over again and not, worry about the structural integrity of the drywall. Polished concrete floors with radiant heating as the primary heat source for the space. So they're very easy to clean. They can withstand, the largest of sculptures being wheeled in that space. Someone can be working in there and not worry about, damaging the floor or the finish. And then we have this kind of material warmth that comes from the ceiling, from the exposed fir ceilings and the exposed rafters. And again, kind of, we alluded to a little bit of that historic language with the structural bridging, which is kind of X-bridging between the rafters, which you see in a lot of the old warehouse spaces around Seattle, and wanting to kind of bring that language back into the project, so that it was another little area we were kind of touching upon the industrial history. The skylight drops in natural light really well into the space, so that was an important thing. We've got kind of windows on all sides to a degree, but having natural light for all the different kind of uses of the space was really important as well. But yeah, overall, just kind of making it very usable and durable, and something that the owners and the users are going to be able to keep up with over the years, hopefully for a very long time with this project.
What would you say was the most difficult to design on this project, and how did you navigate that? What did you learn?
I think one of the challenging things was basically what we set up kind of in our design process. We sort of hemmed ourselves in a little bit, but I think it's a good thing by dedicating so much of that site to park, tightening up the kind of like linear quality of the building, locating it as far to the north as we could. I think we're right up against the setback on the north side. But it really did allow for the park to become kind of front and center, and then the building sort of accepts the park into the courtyard. It's sort of, the space bleeds through, does the same thing to a certain extent on the forecourt side on the east. And then because we were set back a little bit on that north side, just based on city restrictions, like it allowed us to have a nice green wall, like planted green wall on that north side. There's the bioretention planters that all of the stormwater from the building go into on that north side. It really is the kind of utility sort of working side of the building. But initially we were like, okay, we've really pushed the building up, as far north as we could. Now we got to lay out these spaces so that it still works. But luckily we had kind of the length of the site working east-west, and we were able to kind of create these interior and out and exterior rooms through the courtyard and the forecourt, kind of bookending the gallery space.
So you already mentioned one thing I didn't spot in my trolling, and that was the radiant heat in the floors. Were there any sustainability measures taken on this project? And I mean, obviously we know just the brownfield itself in this eternity system of cleaning the soil.
Yeah.
Anything else that you were able to do?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the remediation system is a huge part of the project, and it's already kind of, we did a little research with the analysis of what's been going on over the last few years, and it's already taken 97 pounds of petroleum contaminants out of the soil, so it's doing its job. But beyond that, we have a green roof up above the forecourt and also up above the gallery space, so that really helps with kind of stormwater runoff and just kind of slows down all our Seattle rain as it hits the roof. We always had a kind of future phase for solar as a future component for the project. They really want to aim for net zero on this building, so that is something that we're currently working on with the Mini Mart City Park team, is designing a solar canopy that's going to go over the courtyard, which will allow it to be kind of a really usable space year round. And it's also obviously going to be producing energy for the building. So that's pretty exciting that it's kind of like...
It's super exciting. I feel like a lot of projects say future solar, but this is one where they're actually, just a few years later, we're now like working on permitting for this solar canopy. So it's really cool to see that going forward.
Yep. And then just so they have some smaller elements, they were very cognizant of the types of plantings that were happening in the landscape and making those, pollinator friendly and encouraging kind of the wildlife population to use the site too. So they've really been, say sustainability has been sort of one of the driving forces from the beginning of the project.
I'm going to go down a rabbit hole for a minute. I forgot to warn you that I do that sometimes. So did you have to do anything special with your design of the roof to accommodate a green roof?
Obviously structure, that they take that into account. It's just a heavier load capacity for the structural framing. You have to have a right type of membrane. In this case, it was like kind of a built-up, kind of traditional built-up commercial style roofing system. There's details, you have to be cautious of, like how that turns up, how that integrates to the weather barrier of the exterior of the building. It was a little tricky to integrate. We have kind of this expressed darker stained guardrail up there for if anyone's ever up there maintaining the green roof. And how that all bolts into the parapet was a tricky detail, to figure out, but just one that took a little more time and coordination with the structural engineer. And then how it finally got weatherproofed and kind of liquid flashed and all those details that go into the build of it. Any other green roof? I don't know.
Yeah, I think it was just planned for from the beginning, so that we were, integrating that into the details.
Well, I know, again, being in the same part of the world that you are, water's such a big issue that just any interview I do on in the Pacific Northwest is weatherproofing and water barriers and all those kinds of things people are so much more in tune to that around here than in some other parts of the world because of the amount of water we get today. Let's talk about construction for a minute. Every project, I don't care what you work on, comes with some kind of challenges during construction. Tell me about at least one challenge your team encountered during construction and how you navigated it and got to where you needed to go.
I think just the main challenge on this one was just sort of how atypical the timeline was for the project. We had to really think about phasing of the construction as it aligned with grants coming in and certain grants that had to be used associated with certain phases of construction. So that was a big conversation between us and the contractor and the owners from the beginning, is that, okay, we have to I think the first phase, of foundations was tied to a certain grant, and then we had to kind of pause because we were waiting for other money to come in, which was going to be associated with different things. And so sometimes sort of the phasing and the timing wasn't sequential even necessarily. Some things had to get done a little differently just because of how close they were tied to the fundraising of the project. So that was definitely something we had not come across before and was a little challenging at times. And there was a lot of stops and starts in the project, which can be a little disheartening when you're not, getting the usual construction momentum and you want to see a project kind of come to life. But it was just the nature of how the whole project was funded. Being ready for that in the process and flexible about timing when we start back work. Yeah. But we had a great team, and everyone involved, kind of like we've all been saying, was so passionate about the project that they really wanted to get it done and done right. And that was a really good experience.
This is I know certainly for me, this is a lifetime learner profession. I always tell people, when you think you're an expert, you need to get out of the business because you're never going to be an expert. What, for each of you, what would you say your biggest lesson learned was from this project that will make you a better architect on the next one?
I think it's important for this project, especially this going out to lots of people, if they're listening into this podcast, is to understand the dedication it took, especially I would say on the owner side, in this case 3 artists that in total worked on the project for 17 years, up from 2005 to
And are still involved.
22. They're still involved.
Programming of the building.
And we've mentioned the funding, for the construction, but they were grant funding for all of the programming for the first 5 years of the building. So like to have like that kind of long view, and we said this a bunch in the process, like I always think of the work of Christo and Jean-Claude and like the timelines that they work on for realizing projects that had to go through lots of hoops with wherever they were in the landscape. If you're familiar with their work, I mean, they would start ideas for projects and then complete them 30 years later. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
SuttonBeresCuller, like we're committed in that way. And I think we took that from this, like jumping on board. It's probably not a lesson learned just on this project, but we try to remind ourselves when projects come in that seem challenging, maybe we don't know like the owner's total vision. I think with SuttonBeresCuller, they were very clear.
Yeah.
But a lot of times, like maybe the vision isn't as clear, but you still have to be optimistic from the beginning because it may all come to fruition. So you want it to like be successful in the end. So like having that like optimistic view and, but yeah, just to return to like just understanding what it takes to do a project like this, was incredible from the owner and artist side. And a big lesson for us. It was just inspirational to see them at every corner, like going back to grant funding, going back to volunteers, asking other donors to help out. Like, I mean, yeah, that's a lesson we'll take to a lot of projects, I think.
Yeah, we were constantly astounded by their drive and resilience on a project like this. And
we've had a couple of other owners in the same way that we've just been surprised at every turn. So yeah, it's cool.
Yeah, so I think, just adding on to what Jon said, having that patience for a project like this, and then like the trust in these really passionate clients that as a team we can make it happen, even if.
And we were too. I mean, we started GO'C in late 2012. We heard about this project after doing a few built things in those first 2 years. We heard about it in 2014. So we jumped on and did an initial schematic design phase pro bono so that they could just have the renderings of the project so that they could fund it. So like we were all in from the beginning too, knowing that the funding was going to be a challenge.
Yeah.
So it took everyone. The contractors were amazing that finished the project. Like, we haven't even talked about those guys did an amazing job translating the drawings and following all the details through. So
I imagine that if you were to take on another project that was, being funded by grants, that would probably inform, this experience would inform some of your process working through the design and just everything for that project.
Yeah.
And how you planned ahead.
Yeah, have a better understanding of the process. Yeah.
What's your favorite thing about this project, each one of you?
I think now it is, seeing it come to life and just seeing the amount of diverse activities that happen there, whether it's, kind of what we first initially thought, these like exhibits from different artists, but they have workshops there, they have potlucks, they have movies in the park, they have bands come and play. Obviously they've got, community involved activities, community meetings and the like, but it's just amazing to see it sort of reimagined by each person that's using it. What, we've seen like dance groups come and do like site specific performances, artists take over in different ways. It's just really exciting to see what people do differently with both the building and the park itself, like, and how they both work together to kind of create these special experiences for the community and visitors. So that's, it's just really fun to see everything that's happening there and see their programming for the next few years. And I think they're like booked out for years, ahead with different artists and exhibits and events going on. So that's really fun to see.
And I would answer that. I mean, that one for sure. I would also say that I don't want to make Jon SuttonBeresCuller and Zach Culler's heads too big, but I had followed their work for years, and to be able to work in collaboration as architects with artists that
Yeah.
we love and admired, and that they do, I mean, you have to check out their website. They do weird projects that are just like out there, risk-taking, inspiring, and like, yeah, and then this project comes along, we get to work together on something. It was amazing. Like, that's probably my favorite thing
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah, it was definitely sort of a dream type of project for
Yeah.
us when it came
Yeah.
along, especially so early in our kind of
Yeah.
formation.
Yeah.
Well, if it's booked years in advance, it sounds like it's wildly successful.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's certainly something to be proud of. So what's on the boards, so to speak, at GO'C? What can I look forward to calling you about down the road
Yeah.
and saying, hey, are you coming back and telling me about
Yeah.
that one?
We have some we'd love to come back and talk about for sure. There's a few on the boards right now. I'll mention the ones that we'll likely photograph this year. The first one is called Isle Lair. It's on our website, and it's on Orcas Island. And it really is off the back of this project in terms of like artists, in terms of like this kind of commercial and sort of residential component. Actually,
Yeah.
Mini Mart had a residential component at the outset that we didn't end up doing. But Isle Lair is a project on Orcas Island that will be an artist residence gallery. It'll be a place where this owner wants to invite artists from all over the world to live for 6 months and then have a showing in East Sound on Orcas Island. It's amazing, like, program. It sounds like one of those made up studio projects that you're like, can't believe this is going to be real. It's a new building in East Sound, which there's not a lot of new structures there on Orcas Island in that downtown district. So we're really excited about that one. That's another one that's going to evolve the life of it as it starts to be inhabited by these artists. And then another one that's super unique that we're working on right now. It's under construction. We need to get back to the studio and answer some RFIs on. It's called Menazai. It's a campground. Another one combining two different uses. It's commercial, residential. It's a residential like cabin, kind of standard cabin on the north end of the Olympic Peninsula, and the combined commercial aspect of this little campground. We currently have 3 tent platforms, and then GO'C has designed not only the cabin, but these 3 kind of standalone bathhouse structures that will be sauna and indoor shower space. That one's really exciting. Another one in Seattle that we'll photograph this summer is Alphonse Studio, which is a ceramics studio space, another kind of live-work space. It was permitted as a detached dwelling unit, but it's primarily used as a space to create ceramic works by Natasha Alphonse. Super exciting to work with her. And we had Dovetail on board to build that one. And then finally, I would just mention a project of ours called Blato Boat that we'll probably photograph next month. And it's a new floating on water residence in Seattle's Lake Union.
Yep.
You don't work on any unique, interesting projects, do you? You felt the sarcasm.
we like the variety for sure. Yeah.
Well, I honeymooned on Orcas Island, and what a beautiful place for an artist to be able to go and live for 6 months and create.
Yeah, truly amazing. And this owner client, really inspiring person that is absorbing all of that of the place. She kind of grew up there, so it's going to be a special spot. It's right across from the historical museum there and the farmers market, so it's right up in the mix of East Sound.
Incredible. So I always close with two closing questions. One kind of broad industry question, and one my final question everybody gets. So first, I was once involved on a project that required a ton of unanticipated site remediation due to ground contamination. It had formerly been a dry cleaning business. The site was empty when the owner bought it and had been for some years, but there had been a dry cleaning business there for like 50 years, and they dumped everything in the ground, back in the day. So your project kind of got me thinking about how many of these types of buildings are out there in the world from this different day and age where they didn't have the rules and precautions that we have today, and how we as professionals could be looking at potential projects with a building or a site like that with maybe a different lens. Because I looked at this and I thought, anybody would want to run the other direction. But instead, they did exactly the opposite. What would be your advice to other design professionals in that approach?
They're crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. You two need to get a little bit crazy. But, but I mean, I think we found, and kind of our perspective is that these like forgotten or overlooked buildings or spaces or sites, they sort of, force you to create the most creative responses, and the challenges kind of lead to opportunity in a way. So if you're up for the challenge, you can really, create something unique and make a big impact on the surrounding community. Something that might have been seen as abandoned or derelict or just, a blight to the neighborhood can be transformed into something really wonderful if you have the right approach to it and the right passion and drive, because it takes longer and is harder. But, you need the architects and the clients and the builders who are willing to face those challenges head on, and kind of see the future, see what might be there, and create something amazing. So in a way, it's an opportunity if you look at it the right way.
Well, it sounds to me like you can also possibly, at least in some parts of our country, get some support from your city government by taking those things on, because obviously there's motivation there as well.
Yep, definitely.
And just so you know, the best kind of people are a little crazy, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So final question. Everybody gets this question. I hope we all would like to live a life that leaves some kind of contribution to make the world a better place.
Mm-hmm.
So for each of you, personal or professional, doesn't have to be architecture related, what do you hope your impact will be?
So Aimée and I have spent some considerable time over the last year thinking about this type of question. We believe it's a very important one. Important enough, I think we included a section on our website. We kind of added to our profile narrative. But like our professional mission as a practice is to cultivate a collaborative design ethos dedicated to producing expressive and contextual architecture that enriches its place. And I mean, Mini Mart City Park is a great example of this. How it brings people together, how we can do that better, like in our design process. Like we talk a lot about just being open to all possibilities, when questions arise about what the right solution is, like the answers to those could come from any number of places and any number of people on the team. And that goes to everyone in our office. Just remaining open in that process. We try to be, I think we are doing that. And I feel like this project is an example of that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think kind of what Jon said, creating architecture that enriches its place. Like, I think that's probably one of the most important things. And we really hope that our responses to these challenges and sites and locations and landscapes result in a building that is enriching and kind of going all the way back to the beginning, creating that shelter for the soul,
Mm-hmm.
I think that's sort of the most that we can hope to do.
Yeah, and on a personal note, I mean, what better type of project to be a part of, having a 1-year-old now and leaving this world in a better place, and having a project that's like taking some risks, trying to do something bold within the community that's going to hopefully be around and used for many years to come. And Aimée kind of mentioned this earlier, but just how inspiring it's been to see it used in so many different ways that we didn't plan for is really exciting.
It's amazing how much a little one changes our focus and scope on what we're leaving behind.
And what's important. Yeah, it's true.
Jon and Aimée, it has been such an absolute pleasure to have you both here today to talk about this project. Trust me, you are being very successful in your mission.
Oh,
This is
you.
a really cool project.
Thank you.
I hope you'll come back to the show in the
Yeah,
future and
certainly
tell me
will.
about more projects. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.